people can see for themselves that Iran was not attacking civilian infrastructure, was not bombing apartment buildings, was not targeting hospitals. On the contrary, it was focused in this retaliatory strike on Israel's military capacities. But in the second instance, because this type of propaganda, the narrative that's being propagated by pundits and policymakers, isn't landing on deaf ears, because for the first time the world can truly see the architecture and the succession of events of this conflict. Two things are really striking about the West's response and representation of Iran's retaliatory strike against Israel in recent days. The first, an effort by both pundits and policymakers alike, is to represent Iran's strike as somehow unprecedented, which is a word that we keep hearing in the press releases of Republicans and Democrats alike, and unprovoked, which is to say that the West has done its best to hide the fact that Iran was in fact responding to an earlier strike by the Israeli state on the sovereign territory of its embassy. What it's doing by representing this as an unprovoked and unprecedented attack is decontextualizing it, much as it's done in the long history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, by suggesting that Palestinians, like Iranians now, are motivated by pure and unadulterated anti-Semitism, as opposed to responding under articles defined by the United Nations as legitimate forms of self-defense to prior aggressions by the Israeli state. Now, this brings us to what's notable in the second instance of the West's response. Because they think that they are so clever and effective in presenting this strike as unprovoked and unprecedented, you'll see many times printed in the pages of the New York Times or tweeted out by various pundits that they think that this Iranian retaliatory strike changes everything. By which I mean it's going to rotate the geometry and geography of sympathies with respect to this conflict away from the Palestinians and towards the Israelis. Many people will say things like, up until now, Israel was losing legitimacy and losing steam in its assault on Gaza, but Iran has re-injected the world's sympathies with the people of Israel. Now, this is also striking for its falsity, for its absurdity, for two reasons. In the first instance, because people can see for themselves that Iran was not attacking civilian infrastructure, was not bombing apartment buildings, was not targeting hospitals. On the contrary, it was focused in this retaliatory strike on Israel's military capacities. But in the second instance, because this type of propaganda, the narrative that's being propagated by pundits and policymakers, isn't landing on deaf ears, because for the first time the world can truly see the architecture and the succession of events of this conflict. So my prediction is that the Iran retaliatory strike, for its limited size and scope, actually changes very little about this conflict. That both in the annals of public opinion and in the halls of multilateralism, the same types of pressure and the same types of alliances will remain and sustain as Israel continues its assault on Gaza, as it continues to present itself as the victim of these retaliatory strikes in pursuit of a more aggressive and irredentist approach to its own territories in and outside of the occupied Palestinian territories. So I think that the extent to which that this retaliatory strike is risking escalation of a wider war is a bit overstated, and that Iran, like many of the regional powers, are much more intent on continuing to focus on the narrow conflict that is underway, that it's been half a year as the world has witnessed this unfolding genocide. And I think that few powers, just as few people far beyond the boundaries of the Islamic Republic, are interested right now in that escalation. And that's both the large powers in the West, those in the East, and those, of course, narrowly in the Middle East, I think are really much more narrowly focused on how we can sustain and maintain some of the integrity of international law while also keeping focus on the resolution of the narrow conflict.